So I recently went through something I never thought I'd experience in a quiet suburban neighborhood. A moment so absurd, so chilling, that even now, when I replay it in my head, it doesn't feel real. My wife had just come home from the hospital with our newborn daughter, 3 days old, fragile, precious. We were exhausted, proud, terrified all at once. Parenthood feels like standing on a cliff, every sound sharper, every shadow darker, every moment stretched between love and fear. We thought the hardest part would be sleepless nights, learning diaper changes, feeding schedules, but we were wrong. The hardest part was the knock on our door. It came on a Sunday afternoon, when the sunlight was warm and the world felt quiet. My wife was curled on the couch, cradling our daughter against her chest. I was in the kitchen making tea when the sharp knock, knock, knock cut through the house like a blade. I wiped my hands and opened the door. And there she stood, Karen. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her. The self-appointed queen of the HOA, she didn't just enforce the rules, she lived for them. The grass height, the trash cans, the paint color on your shutters, nothing escaped her gaze. And now she was standing on my porch, arms crossed, lips tight, eyes gleaming with something colder than authority. "I need to speak with your wife," she said. No greeting, no congratulations, no humanity. "She's resting," I replied, keeping my voice level. Karen pushed past me. She didn't ask. She didn't wait. She just stepped into my home like she owned it. And then she said it. "Your wife needs to hand the newborn over to me. Immediately." The words froze the air in my lungs. For a moment I thought I'd misheard. But no, her voice was clear, sharp, unwavering. My wife's head snapped up from the couch, eyes wide, clutching our daughter closer. "Excuse me," she whispered. Karen stepped forward, chin high, like a judge about to pass sentence. "The baby needs to be inspected. HOA regulation. We can't allow unsafe conditions. I've had reports, crying, disturbances. We need to ensure the child is properly cared for." Her words were insane, twisted. The HOA had authority over lawns, fences, driveways, not newborns, but she said it like gospel. I felt heat surge through me. Not anger yet, something deeper, protective instinct. That cold, electric current that floods every nerve when someone threatens your family. "You're not touching my daughter," I said, voice low, steady. Karen's smile didn't waver. "If you refuse, I'll escalate. CPS, the sheriff, don't test me." My wife's arms tightened around our newborn. I saw her lips tremble, saw tears well. And in that instant, a truth struck me. Karen thought she could break us with fear. She thought her title, her threats, her hollow authority could make us hand over our child. But she didn't know who I was. Because before I was a husband, before I was a father, before this quiet suburban street, I was a Navy SEAL. I didn't tell her that, not yet. The time would come. For now I let the silence stretch, my eyes locked on hers. And I saw it, the flicker, the brief hesitation. She wasn't used to resistance. She was used to neighbors apologizing, cowering, bending. But I didn't bend. "Leave," I said. My voice was calm, but beneath it was steel. "Now." For a heartbeat, she stood there, lips twitching with fury. Then she spun on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. The house fell silent again. My wife broke into tears, holding our daughter tighter, whispering over and over, "She can't do that, she can't do that." And I pulled them both close, my chest heavy with a promise I knew I would keep. "No one will ever take you away from me. Not her, not anyone." But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. That knock had been the beginning of something darker, because when people like Karen feel defied, they don't retreat, they escalate. And sure enough, she did. The next morning, I thought maybe it had been a nightmare, that somehow exhaustion had twisted my mind and replayed Karen's voice in my sleep. But then, as I walked outside to grab the paper, I saw it, tucked under my windshield wiper. A letter. The HOA's emblem was stamped across the top in cheap blue ink. My name scrawled on the envelope like an accusation. I tore it open. Notice of violation. Excessive noise disturbance reported. Infant crying past permitted hours. Immediate corrective action required. Infant crying, corrective action. My jaw clenched. She had really done it. Karen had taken the sound of a 3-day-old baby, our baby, and turned it into an HOA violation. My wife was still inside, curled on the couch, the newborn asleep on her chest. If she saw this, if she read those words, it would crush her. I slid the paper into my jacket pocket. For a moment, I considered shredding it, burning it, erasing it from existence. But no, I kept it, because part of me knew we were going to need evidence. That same day, the phone calls began. Unknown numbers, blocked IDs. And when my wife answered one by mistake, the voice on the other end was cold, rehearsed. "This is Child Protective Services. We've received an anonymous report of neglect. We'll be scheduling a home visit." Anonymous, I didn't need a name. I already knew who had dialed those digits. My wife's hands shook so hard she almost dropped the phone. "They can't take her, right?" she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. I took the phone gently from her hand. "No one's taking her," I said firmly. "Not now, not ever." But inside, my blood ran colder, because I knew how bureaucracy worked. I'd seen it overseas, in places where rumors were as dangerous as bullets. Lies repeated often enough start to sound like truth. Karen wasn't just testing us. She was laying a trap, paper trails, complaints, official channels. She wanted to make us look unstable, unfit, unsafe. That night, as I rocked my daughter to sleep, my mind replayed every moment of my military training. In the teams, we learned that battles aren't always fought with guns. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy wears a smile, files reports, and twists the rules to break you from the inside. I whispered to my daughter, her tiny hand gripping my finger, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I fought worse than her, and I've never lost." The next week, it escalated again. We woke one morning to find our trash cans dragged into the middle of the street. Spray-painted across them, in jagged red letters, was a single word: unfit. My wife's gasp turned into a sob. She clutched the baby tighter, shielding her eyes as if she could protect her from the cruelty painted on steel. Neighbors peeked through blinds, some whispering, some shaking their heads. But no one stepped forward. No one helped, because that's what fear does. It silences good people. And Karen fed on that silence. That afternoon, another letter slid under our door. This time it wasn't typed. It was scrawled in thick marker, the handwriting sharp, angry. "Give the baby to someone responsible, before it's too late." My hands shook as I read it, not with fear, with something darker, something hotter. A protective rage I hadn't felt since combat. But rage alone wouldn't win this. Strategy would, patience would. So I started my own quiet war. I documented everything. Every letter, every call, every smear. I logged times, dates, photos, screenshots. Because I knew one day when the moment came, the truth would matter. And through it all, I held my family close. At night, when my wife whispered through tears, "Why is she doing this to us?" I answered with the only truth I had. Because some people only feel powerful when others feel powerless. But power built on fear, it never lasts. Still, as I lay awake in the darkness, listening to my daughter's soft breaths, one thought echoed louder than the rest. Karen wasn't finished. And the next move she made would test us in a way I never saw coming. The neighborhood didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a battlefield disguised with picket fences and flower beds. Every glance from a neighbor carried weight now. Every whisper behind a curtain felt like a report being filed. Karen had begun her campaign, and it wasn't just letters or phone calls anymore. She was recruiting. It started subtly. A neighbor across the street, Mrs. Fletcher, suddenly stopped waving at my wife. Instead, she'd pause in her yard, phone lifted casually, watering her flowers while recording every movement on our porch. Then another family we'd once shared barbecues with crossed the street one morning rather than walking past our driveway. Their little boy, who used to laugh and play catch with me, looked at the ground when I said hello. His father didn't look at all. The poison was spreading. Karen was whispering in ears, planting seeds of doubt. I caught fragments one afternoon while checking the mail. Two neighbors leaned close near the corner, voices low. "She says the baby cries all night. She says they don't sleep, that they're unstable." Well, if it's true. The rest of their words drifted into the wind, but it was enough. Karen wasn't just trying to break us through paperwork. She was painting us as pariahs, unsafe, unfit, a threat to the peace of the neighborhood. And the cruelest part? She didn't need proof, just rumors. Rumors are louder than evidence when fear holds the megaphone. That night, my wife sat at the kitchen table, the baby cradled in her arms, her eyes red. "Everyone's looking at me like I'm broken," she whispered, "like I'm failing as a mother." I knelt beside her, brushing hair from her face. "You're not failing. You're stronger than any of them know, but Karen, she thrives on this, on isolating people, making them feel alone." My wife shook her head. "But what if they believe her? What if?" I cut her off gently. "Listen to me. They don't matter. The only ones who matter are right here, you, me, and her." I looked down at the tiny bundle in her arms. Our daughter stirred softly, her hand curling into a fist too small for war, yet caught in one anyway. But as I said it, I knew the battle wasn't just inside these walls anymore. It was spilling into the street, into every neighbor's living room, and Karen was orchestrating it like a general directing troops. 2 days later, the escalation came. A knock at the door, hard, repeated. I opened it to find 3 HOA board members standing there. Not strangers, men I'd nodded to at meetings, women who'd once complimented our lawn. Now their faces were stiff, their eyes uncomfortable. "Mr. Williams," one said, holding a clipboard, "we've had multiple complaints, noise disturbances, possible neglect. The board has voted to conduct a wellness check." Behind them, Karen stood with folded arms, her smile smug, as if she'd already won. My wife froze in the hallway, clutching our daughter tighter. Tears pooled instantly in her eyes. I stepped forward, blocking their view. "You're not stepping foot inside this house without a warrant. Not now, not ever." Karen's smile widened. "So you're hiding something." I met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm protecting my family from you." The board members shifted uncomfortably. They weren't warriors. They were pawns. Good people tangled in her web. They mumbled excuses, backed away, left papers I refused to take. And all the while, Karen stood there, smirking, her silence louder than their words. When the door shut, my wife broke. She collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this." I wrapped my arms around her, holding both her and our daughter tight. My chest ached with helplessness, but inside something else was building, something colder. Resolve. Karen thought she was winning. She thought her whispers, her lies, her paperwork could unravel us. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd faced worse than this. I'd faced enemies who wanted me dead, not just defeated. And every time, I'd outlasted them. But still, as I lay awake that night, staring into the darkness, one question gnawed at me. How far was she willing to go? Because the look in her eyes at the doorway, it wasn't just smugness, it was hunger. And hunger doesn't stop until it's fed. It was a Wednesday morning when the sirens broke the silence. Not loud, not racing, just a steady approach, a slow arrival that made the air feel heavier. My wife was at the kitchen table, rocking our daughter. I was pouring coffee when the red and blue lights splashed against the blinds. 2 squad cars, right outside our driveway. My stomach dropped, not because I feared what they'd find, we had nothing to hide, but because I knew exactly who had called them. I stepped outside, calm, steady. The officers were already walking up the drive, clipboards in hand. Their expressions weren't hostile, but they weren't friendly either. Just the detached professionalism of men sent to check a box. "Mr. Williams," one asked. "Yes." "We've received a call. Allegations of possible neglect. Infant in unsafe environment. We're here to conduct a welfare check." Over his shoulder at the end of the street, I saw her. Karen, standing with her arms folded, a phone in her hand, lips curled in a satisfied smile, watching like a hunter waiting for the trap to spring. My wife appeared in the doorway, panic etched across her face. "What's happening?" "It's okay," I told her softly. Then louder to the officers, "You're welcome to look, but understand this. This isn't about concern for the child. This is a vendetta, a neighbor with too much power and not enough conscience." The officers exchanged glances, protocol over sympathy. "Sir, we still need to come inside." I exhaled slowly. I wanted to slam the door, wanted to tell them to get a warrant. But I looked at my wife's trembling hands, at my daughter's tiny face, and I realized something. If I resisted, if I turned this into a standoff, Karen would win. She'd twist it, frame it, feed the rumor mill. So I stepped aside. "Come in." They checked the nursery, diapers stacked neatly, formula ready, a crib with blankets tucked tight. They noted everything. And with each passing second, I felt Karen's eyes drilling into the house from the curb. Finally, one officer closed his notebook. "Everything looks fine here. We'll file the report as clear." Relief washed over my wife's face. She clutched our daughter tighter, whispering thanks under her breath. But I didn't feel relief. I felt the burn of her smirk at the end of the street, because Karen didn't need to win today, she just needed to plant doubt. When the officers left, she actually waved at me. A mocking little wave, like a queen acknowledging her subject. And that's when I knew this wasn't going to end with reports or warnings. She was going to keep pushing, keep escalating until something broke. That night, after my wife finally fell asleep, I sat alone in the dark living room. My daughter's soft breaths echoed from the nursery, and I thought back to deployments, back to the desert, back to nights where silence meant survival. Karen thought she was playing a game of paperwork and whispers. She thought she had the upper hand because she had a title and a clipboard. But she didn't know me. She didn't know the man she was up against. Because before this quiet neighborhood, before this house, before the title Dad ever crossed my lips, I wore another title. A title she could never understand. I was a Navy SEAL. And if there's one thing the teams taught me, it's this: you don't fight fire with panic. You fight it with patience. With precision, you don't lash out, you wait, you watch, you strike when it counts. So that's what I decided. I wouldn't match her noise with noise. I'd collect. I'd document. I'd build a case so airtight not even her lies could slip through. Because battles aren't won in the first strike, they're won in the last. Still, as I stared out the window at the quiet street, the unease wouldn't leave. Because in her eyes I hadn't seen satisfaction. Not fully, I'd seen hunger. And hunger never sleeps. The welfare check should have ended it. Any reasonable person would have backed off once the police left with clean reports. But Karen wasn't reasonable. She wasn't satisfied. She had tasted control, and now she was hungry for more. The next day, another letter appeared. This one slipped into our mailbox without a stamp, unsigned but obvious. "Your child deserves better. We're watching, we'll keep watching." I didn't show it to my wife. She was already carrying too much. Instead, I slipped it into the same folder where I kept every report, every photo, every shred of her harassment. My war chest. But I knew I couldn't fight this war alone. So that week, I started reaching out quietly. The first person I called was Robert, our neighbor 2 streets over, retired firefighter, a man who knew what it meant to stand in the flames. He'd been fined by Karen once for leaving his truck parked outside his garage after a late shift. We talked about it before, his voice full of the same frustration I now carried. When I showed him the folder, his eyes darkened. "She's gone too far this time," he said. "Count me in." Then there was Mrs. Ellis, the widow who lived near the cul-de-sac. Karen had written her up for planting flowers outside HOA-approved colors. She'd broken down crying the day she got the violation. Now, when I knocked on her door and explained what Karen had done to us, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "She thinks she can bully everyone," she whispered. "But bullies only win until someone stands up." One by one, I found them, quiet allies, people who'd felt Karen's wrath and carried their own scars. They weren't fighters in the physical sense, but they had something just as valuable: stories, records, evidence. And slowly, my folder thickened. I documented her threats to us. Robert gave me copies of his fines. Mrs. Ellis showed me a letter where Karen had actually written, "If you can't keep up with community standards, perhaps you shouldn't live here." Cold, ruthless. Piece by piece, I was building something. But even as I worked, Karen escalated again. It was subtle at first. Cars idling near our driveway at night. Phone calls that hung up the moment we answered. My wife swore she saw someone flash a camera through the nursery window, though when I checked the yard, no one was there. She was turning the screws, tightening pressure, trying to make us crack. And still the neighbors watched from behind curtains. Some sympathetic, some suspicious, most too scared to act. Fear has a way of freezing communities, of keeping good people silent. One night after putting our daughter to bed, my wife whispered, "What if she really convinces people? What if we lose her?" I looked at her, at the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight she carried. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't just wait for the system to fix this. I had to step fully into the fight. "I won't let that happen," I said firmly. "You married a Navy SEAL, and SEALs don't lose their families." Her tears fell, but she nodded, leaning into me, trusting me. That trust became fuel. The next morning, I went further. I set up discreet cameras around the house, not for us, for her, to catch her in the act, to capture what she didn't think anyone would see. I adjusted my routine, too, walks at odd hours, watching the street, learning patterns. Who lingered, who looked, who turned away too fast. And the strangest thing happened. Once I started moving with purpose, once I stopped looking like prey, people began to notice. Robert gave me a nod one morning as he drove past. Mrs. Ellis waved with more than politeness. She waved with courage. Karen had ruled through fear, but fear only lasts until someone breaks it. Still, I knew she wasn't done. The folder was thick but not full. The cameras were set but not yet triggered. And in her eyes, whenever I saw her at the mailbox or walking her dog, I saw the storm still brewing. Because Karen wasn't satisfied with whispers and letters anymore. She wanted a spectacle. And I had a sinking feeling she was about to get one. It happened on a Saturday. The kind of morning when families should be mowing lawns, kids riding bikes, the smell of barbecue drifting from backyards. But instead, the street filled with folding chairs, clipboards, and the buzz of whispers. Karen had called a special HOA meeting, and she had chosen her stage carefully, right in front of our house. When I stepped onto the porch, I counted nearly 30 neighbors gathered on the cul-de-sac. Some leaned on fences. Others sat stiffly in lawn chairs Karen had provided. At the center stood a collapsible table with stacks of papers, and behind it, Karen, beaming like a conductor about to lead her grand symphony. My wife appeared behind me, clutching our daughter close, eyes wide with dread. "She can't." "She will," I murmured, jaw tight. "Stay inside, let me handle this." But she shook her head. "No, she's attacking all of us, I won't hide." So we stepped out together. Karen's voice carried across the crowd. "Thank you, everyone, for attending on such short notice. As you all know, it's my duty as HOA president to ensure our neighborhood remains safe, orderly, and fit for families. But unfortunately, one household has repeatedly failed to meet those standards." Dozens of eyes shifted toward us, some sympathetic, some curious, some cold. Karen lifted a folder and waved it dramatically. "We have here multiple reports of noise disturbances, neglect, and unsafe conditions for a newborn child. We cannot allow such behavior to endanger the peace of this community." My wife gasped, clutching the baby tighter. I felt heat rush to my face, not from fear, from fury. Karen slapped the folder on the table like it was a gavel. "Therefore, I propose a motion. This family be formally cited, fined, and referred to the proper authorities for further action. If necessary, removal from the neighborhood." The words hung in the air like poison. Removal! She had crossed a line even I hadn't expected. I stepped forward, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut. "Are you out of your mind, Karen? This isn't a courtroom, and you don't have the authority to decide who does or doesn't get to raise their own child." Her smile sharpened. "Then why don't you let the community decide? After all, it's their peace at stake." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others shifted uncomfortably. Karen thrived on that hesitation, on the way uncertainty bred silence. But she wasn't prepared for what came next. Because as she rattled off her accusations, one by one, a voice rose from the crowd. "That's not true." It was Robert, the retired firefighter. He stepped forward, arms crossed. "You're twisting things, Karen. They're good parents. I've seen it with my own eyes." Karen's smile faltered. Robert, please don't embarrass yourself. But another voice joined. Mrs. Ellis, the widow. You embarrassed yourself when you fined me for planting flowers. Enough is enough. And then another, and another. Neighbors standing, shaking off their fear, speaking truths they'd kept locked away. Karen's smirk cracked. She tried to regain control, her voice rising. These are isolated incidents. You're just bitter about fines. This is about safety. I stepped forward then, holding up a folder of my own. Thicker, heavier. Funny thing, Karen, I said, my voice low but carrying. You talk about safety, but I've documented every letter you've sent, every violation you fabricated, every threat you whispered. And guess what? You're the danger here, not us. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. Karen's face flushed. You're lying, she spat. I pulled out one of her handwritten notes, the one scrawled in thick marker. Give the baby to someone responsible before it's too late. I held it high for all to see. This is your handwriting, your threat. Do you deny it? Silence. Karen's lips trembled. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the power shifted. Not because I shouted, not because I threatened, but because truth had weight, and in that moment everyone felt it. Karen's eyes darted from face to face, desperate for an ally, but all she found were stares, cold, unforgiving. The queen of the HOA had lost her crown. Still, as she gathered her papers with shaking hands and stormed off, I knew this wasn't the end. People like Karen don't surrender. They regroup. And the storm she carried in her eyes that day told me one thing. She wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The neighborhood was quiet after the meeting. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel like peace but like the pause before lightning splits the sky. Karen hadn't spoken to us since that day. No notes, no calls, no smug waves at the mailbox, but silence from someone like her isn't surrender, it's strategy. I knew she was planning something, and I didn't have to wait long to find out. It was late, a week after the meeting. My wife and daughter were asleep, their breathing soft in the dark. I sat in the living room, the glow of the baby monitor casting faint light on the walls. Then crack. The sound of glass breaking. I was on my feet instantly. Years of training don't fade, they etch into your bones. My body moved before my mind caught up. Another sound followed, a low shuffle, a door creaking. Someone was inside. I moved silently, every step calculated, and when I reached the kitchen, I saw her. Karen. Standing in my home, clutching a flashlight and a folder, her eyes wild, her hands trembling. She froze when she saw me, but only for a second. Then she hissed, I warned you, you're unfit, I'm taking the baby. The words hit like fire in my chest. For a moment, the world narrowed to nothing but her silhouette in the dark and the thought of my daughter upstairs. I didn't shout, didn't panic. I simply stepped forward, my voice steady as stone. Put the folder down, leave now. But she didn't move. She took a step closer instead. If you won't protect her properly, I will. Everyone knows it. CPS knows it. The board knows it. You're finished. And then she tried to push past me. That's when instinct took over. In one swift motion, I caught her wrist, twisted gently but firmly, and guided her arm behind her back. She gasped, dropping the folder. Papers scattered across the tile like falling leaves. I leaned close, my voice a whisper she would never forget. You just broke into the home of a Navy SEAL, and you threatened my family. Do you understand what that means? Her breath came fast, shallow. She trembled in my grip. You can't. Yes, I cut her off. I can, and I will, because I've faced men with guns, bombs, entire armies behind them, and none of them scared me half as much as the thought of losing my little girl. So believe me, Karen, if you ever come near my family again, it won't be a board meeting you'll answer to. It'll be the law. She whimpered, finally breaking. Her body sagged under my hold, her defiance crumbling into fear. I released her and she stumbled back, clutching her arm, eyes wide. For the first time, she looked small. I picked up one of the scattered papers, holding it up under the flashlight's beam. It wasn't just notes. It was a file. Copies of letters she'd written, photographs of our house, even a schedule she'd scribbled of when our baby cried, when we turned on lights, when we left for errands. An obsession. I stared at her, my voice low. This ends tonight. Then I called the police. When the sirens arrived, the same neighbors who had once whispered behind curtains now stood outside, watching. Watching as Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was led away in handcuffs, her face pale, her crown shattered. My wife stood on the porch, our daughter in her arms. Tears filled her eyes, but for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. I wrapped my arms around them both, the weight of weeks of tension finally lifting. But even in that moment of victory, I knew the story wasn't finished. Because battles like this don't end with handcuffs, they end with choices. And Karen still had one left to make. The night Karen was taken away, the neighborhood exhaled. For weeks, tension had hung over our street like a storm cloud, and now, with red and blue lights fading into the distance, silence settled. Not the heavy silence of fear, a different kind. The silence of something broken finally being lifted. Inside, my wife laid our daughter in her crib. For the first time in weeks, she slept without tears in her eyes. I sat nearby, watching my little girl's chest rise and fall, and thought about how close we had come to losing peace in the one place it should have been sacred. But I knew this wasn't over, not yet. Because Karen's story didn't end with handcuffs. She tried to fight the charges, trespassing, harassment, stalking. The folder she carried into our home that night became her undoing. It wasn't evidence against us, it was evidence against her. When the police laid those papers on the courtroom table, no amount of HOA titles or smug smiles could protect her. Every photo she'd taken of our windows, every note she'd written in anger, every lie she'd filed as official HOA documentation. One by one, they stacked up, forming a picture not of a protector but of a predator. I sat in the back of the courtroom, my wife beside me, our daughter asleep in her carrier. I didn't need to testify. The truth spoke loudly enough on its own. And when the judge finally read the sentence, probation, fines, removal from the HOA board, Karen's shoulders slumped. She looked small, fragile, almost pitiful. I didn't cheer, I didn't smile. Because the truth is, victories like that don't feel like triumph, they feel like survival. When we walked out of that courthouse, neighbors were waiting. Robert clapped me on the shoulder. Mrs. Ellis hugged my wife tight, whispering, "You're safe now." One by one, the community gathered, not in fear this time, but in solidarity. Karen's reign had ended, and in its place, something unexpected grew. For weeks, people brought casseroles, offered babysitting, stopped by with flowers. The same neighbors who once looked away now looked us in the eyes, spoke, shared. It was as if Karen's downfall had unshackled them all. One evening, as I rocked my daughter on the porch, I saw kids playing tag in the cul-de-sac again. Laughter floated through the air. Lawns were untrimmed, toys were scattered, and for the first time in months it didn't feel like a violation. It felt like life. My wife sat beside me, her hand on mine. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked softly. I looked at our daughter's tiny fingers curled around mine. I thought about all the nights I'd lain awake, heart racing, waiting for the next knock, the next letter, the next threat. And I realized something. "It's never over," I said quietly. "There will always be people like her, people who think rules make them gods, people who mistake fear for power. But as long as we stand together, as long as we remember who we are, they'll never win." She leaned her head against my shoulder, tears glistening in her eyes. Not tears of fear this time, tears of something else. Gratitude, relief, hope. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold, I whispered to my daughter, the same way I had in those dark nights when everything felt like it was slipping away. "You're safe, always safe, because sometimes the strongest battles aren't fought overseas or on battlefields. Sometimes they're fought right here in the quiet streets against the people who think they can take what isn't theirs. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply protecting the ones you love." The porch light flickered on, the cicadas hummed, life moved forward. And for the first time in what felt like forever, peace didn't feel like a dream. It felt real. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.